Hey everybody, and welcome to a somewhat special movie review. Two things right off the bat before we get started. One, you see, I really wanted to review Batman vs. Superman next week, but while preparing for that review, I felt a lot of my feelings and opinions towards it connect very much to my feelings on Man of Steel. So rather than bog down that review with 10 minutes of me explaining all of that, I figured, hey, why not just review Man of Steel on its own to better set up the Batman vs. Superman review. And two, now I know what some of you already might be thinking. On my channel I already did a whole Spider-Man review series with a movie and game reviews, I started another review series involving all of Marvel's heroes, which I should probably get back to at some point, and I even did a review on the recent Fantastic Four movie. So with all that content and not a single mention of DC, you might be inclined to think that I'm some Marvel fanboy who just thinks everything DC does is crap, and I just want to hate on this new movie. And I'm here to say that this preconceived notion couldn't be more wrong! Exactly. I really like DC and Marvel. Yes, I will admit that I do like Marvel way more than DC, these days especially, though that's probably due to the fact that Marvel is almost a decade ahead of where DC is when it comes to its films. Although I love the original two Christopher Reeve Superman movies, I love the original two Tim Burton Batman movies, I loved Christopher Nolan's take on The Dark Knight a few years back, and hell, I even have a soft spot for campy movies like Batman Forever and the less than thrilling Superman Returns. I just really wanted to review Batman vs. Superman, since I kind of hope that it's going to break a lot of the preconceived notions that it might end up as a bat turd gift wrapped in kryptonite. I want it to be good, and I hope that next week I can start that review by saying just that. However, let's just start with Man of Steel, since like I said, a lot about what I feel about Man of Steel creates my notion that I can't really shake about how I think that Batman vs. Superman might not be the film I hope it's going to be. Before Man of Steel's release, I was pretty excited for it. The trailers looked really cool, the action looked sweet, the casting seemed great, and it also felt like we were going to get a Superman movie reboot worthy of fan approval. And for the final result, well, you'll see in a bit. As a reboot of the entire series, there was a lot of ways in which director Zack Snyder could have gone with this, and I like what they were trying to go for, but there are spots in Man of Steel that seem like they go out of their way just to be different and not to copy what the original films did with the origin story, and in some cases it doesn't work out for the best. Also, on a bit of a side tangent note here, you're doing an entire reboot of the Superman series, and yet somehow the writers chose General Zod as the villain again. I mean, I just don't understand. What is it with the writers of the Superman movies, like all of them, only ever thinking that Lex Luthor and General Zod are like the only villains to use? I mean, doesn't anybody want to see like a live-action version of Brainiac on the big screen? And I'm talking about the robot version from like the animated show and even Smallville, not the green alien imp guy that shrunk cities into little bottles. I mean, you're telling me you can't write a script with Brainiac set in our tech-driven culture world that we live in today? I mean, that story could basically write itself. The film has a good start, though, trying to be its own thing without ripping off on the original. It shows us the actual birth of Kal-El before jumping right into the whole Jor-El warning Krypton's leaders that the planet is doomed to extinction. But there are things in this opening that do kind of get to me. It's in these opening moments that we are introduced to our villain, General Zod, who is staging a coup d'etat already. Despite the fact that we've never seen him before, he's just already there doing it, since he feels that the current leadership has doomed Krypton. The explanation as to why Zod is the bad guy is pretty quickly glossed over in this scene. Sure, Jor-El mentions a couple of points that, oh, his friend wasn't always like that, but we never really see that. He's just bad from the minute we see him in this film. Also, these opening moments bring about a pretty big change from the original Superman film, and probably the comics, I think, in that this version, all of Krypton's population were genetically born and given a job in society at birth. So for Zod, he was born to be a soldier and protect Krypton, so that's all he feels he can live for. Kal-El, on the other hand, as it turns out, is not genetically born, one of the first pure births in, like, years apparently, and therefore, according to his parents, they feel like he'll be able to choose and make his own destiny in the world. This is alright, but then there's also a codex of all the potential future children of Krypton laced in it, and Jor-El packs it away with Kal-El before sending him to Earth, and then later in the film, Clark has to make a choice whether to repopulate Earth with Krypton's descendants, and I think we all pretty much knew how that was going to play out in the end. I mean, they don't call Superman the last son of Krypton for nothing. This whole Krypton's people were bred for one thing to accomplish during their lifetime, it just seemed like a really easy way to justify all of Zod's actions for most of this film. He was bred to protect Krypton, and that's all he does regardless of who he hurts in the process. He even says a line like that later in the film. They didn't need to give him motivation because he was, well, literally born that way. An issue I took overall was with the pacing of the film. After the prologue on Krypton, the plot starts to jump around a bit. We jump to a present-day Clark, and then we get flashbacks of his childhood in Smallville. It jumps around a little bit haphazardly and a little too quickly. Like, 1 minute we see Clark in the water, and boom, flashback. And then 2 minutes later, he just walks the street, sees a bus pass by, and another flashback. Some of these do feel a bit forced in the moments. They don't really come on organically. He just sees things, and boom, flashback. I would rather have the plot just showed us Clark growing up as a kid before showing us the adult Clark. And also because of this back and forth and space out, it kind of hurts the relationship between Clark and his Earth parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, since we only really see them in pieces and it's not always in order, at least not the correct chronological order maybe. Though some of the flashbacks are pretty good, like the scene when Clark first develops his powers at school, or when Jonathan reveals to Clark his true origins. However, some of the later flashbacks are a bit unnecessary since they basically keep repeating the same message just in different words. They keep talking about Clark using his powers in public and how when he finally does it's going to change the world, and by the second flashback we all get this, yet the film keeps trying to hammer that point home like we're all dense and retarded. Like, it's not enough that in the present day you've got Jor-El's little computer AI thingy saying the same thing to Clark in every damn scene they share. Also, I want to probably single out the one flashback where Clark tells Lois about how his father died, which is probably the one flashback that isn't really forced in. The whole scene is a great example of how I feel the writers were trying a little too hard to distance themselves from anything from the original Superman movie. So in the original film, Jonathan Kent has a meaningful talk with Clark about how to use his powers and what his purpose on Earth is, and then he suddenly dies of a heart attack out of the blue. This scene is powerful since it brings Clark to the realization that even with all of his super abilities, he couldn't save him. Here it's a little bit different. While driving along the road, a tornado shows up and Martha, Clark, and Jonathan ditch their car, only to have forgotten their dog inside, which I'll let slide despite the fact that that's like the most cliche thing ever, to have the dog in the car and you have to run back and get it. I don't know, it irks me, but I'll let it pass. To which Jonathan goes back to get the dog only to twist his ankle in the recovery effort, and he can't escape from the storm in time before it swallows him up. So Clark wants to rush in and save him, but Jonathan tells him to hold off since the world is not ready to see his powers yet, and so Clark stands by and watches his father die. But I call bullshit. You're telling me that Clark couldn't super speed his way over to Jonathan and bring him to safety. No one would have seen him. I mean, I get the message that's trying to be conveyed here, but it's poorly set up. I mean, how about having Jonathan at work with Clark when there's this accident or something that like crushes Jonathan, and Clark has to sit by while the paramedics show up, and then maybe they can't stop the bleeding in time, and by the time they get him to a hospital, it's too late for him. In that situation, Clark can't use his powers since he would have to clearly go over to Jonathan to save him, and people would clearly see this and be freaked out by his powers. But this whole tornado thing, I always felt it was a really weak setup for this. Clark could have saved his father, just speed in and speed out. Look, I know he's not the Flash, but I thought Superman was pretty fast, isn't he? Oh, can I just talk about the scene in the church for a moment? Because that's another one that really ekes me off. David Goyer should have his fingers chopped off for writing this vomit-inducing scene. So, right after Zod sends his instant message Skype chat to the world that he's looking for Kal-El, Clark considers his options of surrendering himself over to him. So does he talk to Martha, or even Lois? How about Jor-El's memory conscious thingy, which would clearly be able to tell him a lot more about Zod? Nope, Clark goes to a church and talks to some random priest. This whole scene reeks of symbolism, and not in that you really need to look back at it multiple times to see it, but more in that there might have well have been signs all over the screen telling you exactly what it is. And then if this wasn't bad on its own, Zack had to frame this shot. Like, are you kidding me? Look, we get it, guys. Superman is a Christ-like figure. We know that. There are 5-year-olds in Sunday school that could tell you this. Why is this scene even here? I mean, this is just too on the nose that it becomes distraction. There's already a ton of Christ imagery and allusions in this film with the whole Clark could be a better man than the rest of humanity, a savior for the world. I mean, did we really need a scene where Clark talks to some random priest and putting Henry Cavill in the frame with Jesus kneeling 2 inches from his head? God, I hate this scene. I remember rolling my eyes in the theater the first time I saw this, and even now, it still gets on my nerves. And I guess another big issue I had with the film overall was the character development, which seems to almost be non-existent after Zod arrives on Earth. Like the development between Clark and Lois. I really have no idea why Lois likes Clark by the end. They talk a few times at best, and then when Zod shows up, Clark saves her from falling to her death not once, but twice, with no more meaningful interactions to be found. There's no development at all between them. Hell, even in the original film there was more than what's here. I mean, there was the whole interview Lois had with Superman, and then the flying sequence thing. I mean, it's not much, but it's better than this. Also, I did like Lois's character at the beginning of the film, since it's exactly what's in line with what this character is, a reporter who's willing to do anything to get her story. Yet for the second half of the film, all she does is kind of just tag along for the ride. Oh, and blurting out Clark's name every 5 minutes in close proximity to other people while he's dressed as Superman. She really has no purpose in the later half of the film. Seriously, at one point Zod requests that Lois be brought to him along with Superman, and she, much like much of the audience, is confused and wonder why. She gets on the ship and nothing really happens to her other than she's placed in a cell. And that's it. After Superman her escape, she does claim that they looked into her mind, but for what sort of information? Clark's Earth name? A good thing Lois called him Clark not once, but twice, right in front of Zod. I mean, she could have just said Kent along with it and made Zod's job that much easier. Then you've got the characters at the Daily Planet who, honestly, I'm not even sure what some of their names are except for Perry White. And yet there's a scene during the whole destruction of Metropolis where the girl who everyone thought was the female Jimmy Olsen is stuck under a rock when Baldy here and Perry have to save her. And they build up this whole thing like they're all gonna die, and honestly, I couldn't have cared less. Well, for the girl and Baldy. I mean, you can't kill Morpheus. And now we get to it, the moment of this film that had the great majority of Superman fans up in arms. Yes, the snap heard round the world. Yes, even when seeing this for the first time, I, again, called bullshit. I mean, the writers desperately wanted Superman to be put in a situation where he would have to kill to save lives or to end the trouble that was going on, so they did this. Even though that family could have moved the other way, or Superman could have just covered Zod's eyes for a second, or hell, even just, tossed them away like he'd been doing all day. Though Snyder and his writers were quick to comment on this themselves after release, claiming that Superman killed Zod and he felt terrible doing it, so now he knows not to kill. But the writing here is weak, since after Soup kills Zod, plot holes aside with what you want to think, he lets out a loud-ass scream and we cut to another scene entirely, a scene that's used for comedic purposes rather than addressing the big issue that Snyder and his writers were apparently trying to address. I mean, how about a scene with Superman and Lois where he tells her how he feels about killing Zod, how it doesn't feel right, and maybe have him tell her that if he's gonna be the beacon of hope for humanity, he can't kill. That will set him apart from the people that he has to protect Earth from. But no, he just screams and cuts away. And also, on a quick side tangent again, in regards to the humor in Man of Steel, I mean, Jesus Christ, you'd find more cheer in a graveyard. Look, I know a movie like this isn't going to be a laugh riot, but you could have some fun with it. I mean, it's surprisingly, that funny little scene after the neck snap, that might be the one laugh this movie's got. I mean, in the words of another DC character, why so serious? Now, from all of this, you might think that I thought the movie was garbage, and again, you'd be wrong. There are plenty of things I like about Man of Steel. I mean, the cast was really good. Henry Cavill was great as Clark and Superman, though I probably would have liked to see him more as just Clark, but his Superman is spot on. Amy Adams was great as Lois Lane, but the script just gave her nothing to do in some spots. Russell Crowe and Michael Shannon are also really good. I don't dislike any of them, and I don't think any of them are horribly miscast to play a character that clearly doesn't look like them. But the script around them just, in my opinion, wasn't very tight, and it hurt the quality of the film overall. Also, the action scenes were really great too. Fantastic. Some of the best and coolest looking action scenes I've ever seen in a superhero film. The way Superman moves really fast and punches people through an entire building, it's great. It's what we've always wanted to see in a Superman movie. The only issue is that the last hour of this film is nothing but a giant action scene, and it just never stops. And after a while, the cool factor of watching Superman punch through a building, or get thrown through a building, or blow up an entire building, I mean, it kind of gets old. I mean, smaller, more condensed action scenes leading up to a bigger brawl might have been a better way to go with it. I mean, Superman fought the Kryptonians in Smallville the same way he fights Zod, and probably with the same amount of explosions. So it's not any different, it's just more of the same. Man of Steel isn't a terrible superhero movie, though, not by a long shot. The new Fantastic Four movie, the original Hulk, both Ghost Rider films, Green Lantern, I mean, those are some of the worst superhero movies that you'll see in recent memory. Hell, I still don't really even agree with the Rotten Tomatoes score that Man of Steel got. I mean, at least deserved in the 70s. And now I can explain why my opinions of this film have kind of seeped into my fear for the quality of Batman vs. Superman. You see, Man of Steel wasn't a bad movie by any means, nor was it one of the greatest superhero movies I've ever seen. It was a decent start. A start that I hoped would have been improved in a sequel. A direct sequel, not Batman meets Superman co-starring members of the Justice League. They needed another film to build up these characters who honestly still feel hollow after just one movie. You have to think of it this way. Marvel built up to its Avengers team up by having not one, not two, but 5 individual films set up characters and build out the world. And yet DC, for whatever reason, saw fit to use Man of Steel as the entire structure for their shared universe, choosing to screw over a Man of Steel 2 to seemingly just play catch-up to Marvel. And yes, they can scream all day and long in press releases that this isn't what they wanted to do and that that's not the case entirely, but it's what everyone's going to think and probably is sort of true in the long run. And really, that's not what should be done here. Now, Batman vs. Superman might be fine. It might introduce all the characters and build out the world all in one film. It's a monumental task, but it is possible if great care is taken with the scripting. Though you gotta admit, there is a lot of crap going on in Batman vs. Superman. I mean, you've got the title match itself, you got Wonder Woman, you got a cameo from the Cyborg, Flash, and Aquaman. Doomsday's in it as the main bad guy, I guess, and there's even some hints of Darkseid in association with everything else that we don't know. I just get this feeling that DC just tried to throw everything into this one film. It's like they had a blender, they threw everything in there, hit the puree button, and now they're gonna force it down our throats in a 3-hour movie and just pray everything sticks. Look, I've just seen too many superhero movies where overloading the plot with multiple characters, villains, and teasing for the future, it fails badly. We've been down this road before. Iron Man 2 suffered because they were too busy trying to tease up the Avengers. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 failed horribly trying to set up multiple different franchises, and you see where that ended up, being completely rebooted and stopped now. So, yeah, it just bad premonitions with this. Now, I could be wrong about all of this, and I really hope that I am. I hope that next week when I start that review on Batman vs. Superman, I don't have to say I was right to worry and that all of our worst fears are confirmed. I want DC's film universe to succeed. I know very little about their heroes, and so to do a successful film series would be awesome. And I would love for DC to be on the same level as Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I just don't think they can do it if they want to rush everything, which at times it feels like they are. So come back later this week when I get to take a look at Batman vs. Superman, and hope to God it's not as bad as I still think it's going to be. So come back later, and thanks for watching.